In 1995, KRIVYI was the most populated by local residents. People were literally afraid to go out on the streets, yet no one knew who, where, and when would become the next victim of the maniac. Fortunately, he was eventually caught and brought to justice. The criminal turned out to be Nikolai Rosenstein, a native of such a place called Russia. After the maniac was detained, the residents were able to sleep peacefully. Indeed, it took only 23 years. The first serious attacks on women in the city have not been repeated since. Sit down more comfortably, dear ones, because this is scary. Indeed, in May 2018, panic swept through the streets of Kryvyi again. Someone was scaring and harassing young women. The first victim on May 27th was 17-year-old Maria when she was coming home from a City Day celebration concert. She was walking through Bogdan Khmelnytsky Park in the Metallurgical District. The girl had taken the path dozens of times alone, without any problems. But this particular time was the last. Maria's mother didn't sleep all night. She wasn't disturbed by the sounds. She was just waiting for her daughter to come home. And when she didn't show up in the morning, the woman still called the police. Unfortunately, the search for Maria didn't last long. Tragically, the girl was already dead. The naked body was just thrown in the bushes of the very same Bogdan Khmelnytsky Park. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, that is, suffocation. This incident was identified as an isolated case. However, further investigation soon revealed that this was not the case. After the outcry and dozens of posts about Maria's story, information about another very similar attack on another girl that happened earlier came to light. Friends of the victim reported that on the 24th, their colleague was peacefully engaged on the sports field when a man approached her from behind and immediately began to strangle her, grabbing her throat in a vice-like grip. The girl didn't see her attacker and quickly lost consciousness, but she survived. Arriving home without pants and in severe pain, she realized she had been assaulted. Barely pulling herself together, she immediately reported to the police, but it was of little use. The police checked the scene, found nothing, and put the case in the so-called long drawer. And only after Maria's murder and posts about her on social networks, this case resurfaced. Moreover, it turned out that she is just the tip of the iceberg of crimes and murders. Investigators began to check all the statements that had been received over the past time and found out that on May 15th, there was another very similar attack, which led to the idea that one person is behind them. And despite all this, in order to almost actively search for the criminal, the police needed one more thing. One more incident, which happened late at night on June 14th, when 20-year-old Alina was returning home alone from a friend's house. The girl's path went through the territory of the 9th City Hospital, where an unknown person attacked her. Alina worked as a clerk, and according to her mother, often after the evening shift, she stayed to sleep at her friend's house. The same woman was not surprised by the absence of her daughter at home, as it happened quite often. However, when the next day the girl did not come home again, the mother decided to turn to law enforcement agencies. And they found Lena, or rather her body, very quickly. Ultimately, the 9th City Hospital workers, not the police, found her. That morning, a sanitation worker was taking out the trash and accidentally stumbled upon a dead girl who was completely naked, beaten, and as it turned out later, strangled. It seemed as if all these monstrous crimes were combined into one case at the same time, but the police were still hesitating.
This includes the version that one person did this. However, until the criminal is caught, all circumstances will not be clarified. There is no reason to combine them.
And yet, as I guessed earlier, after this incident, the police gathered all the evidence and revealed a characteristic similarity. The maniac had specific preferences according to which he chose potential victims. All the girls were slender, tall, with dark or dark brown hair, aged 17 to 38. Plus, the women didn't know each other. They were in no way socially connected. This meant that the attacker acted spontaneously. Investigators concluded that until the moment of the attack, the maniac did not stalk his potential victims, but found them on the same evening when the attack itself took place. More likely, he was hanging around the area after a workday, spotted a victim, assessed the possibility of an attack, and stalked until he found the right moment. Since the attacker was always behind them, the girls who saw him couldn't manage to catch his face. And this, of course, greatly complicated the investigation, but still, they do everything possible. A 38-year-old woman was attacked, like all the other victims, from behind, after which the maniac began to strangle her. Because of this, the man was acting a bit more cautiously, and before the attack, the woman was able to catch a glimpse of his face. Fortunately, the perpetrator didn't notice this, which is why the victim survived. The same woman's testimony later helped to catch the photo robot maniac, to the creation of which also contributed the previous victims who could provide any specific details about the visual features of the mysterious man. This was one of the first significant breakthroughs in the case, even though the photo robot was far from perfect, and the photo robot itself was barely enough to instill fear. Regrettably, the perpetrator didn't stop and claimed another victim. The woman was strangled and suffocated in a brutal manner near another city hospital. The maniac dumped the victim in the sewer. Fortunately, despite severe injuries, the woman survived and even managed to surface on her own, after which she also turned to the police. If you think the investigators worked on it quite freely, then perhaps you are mistaken. And perhaps, in real life, finding a killer is much more complicated than in the movies. So, after the last attack, the search for the crooked-handed maniac involved over 500 people, both law enforcement and just concerned citizens. In addition to the photo robot, the police also had a psychological portrait at this time. The perpetrator was extremely prone to sadism, violence, and clearly enjoyed dominating his victims. His favorite time of attack was after 9 p.m. It was rumored that the murderer, this very Nikolai Rosenstein, who had been terrorizing the city 23 years ago, was actually back. He served his sentence and went back to his preferred work. However, that's not how it actually is. Rosenstein was sentenced to death and in fact became one of the last convicts to be executed in Ukraine. Well, they first abolished the death penalty in our country, although for such a one, it could be reinstated. In any case, the locals were shocked, and not everyone, it seems, knew about the real story of Rosenstein. At that time, women hardly ever went out alone, just like in 1995, and men really suffered in their own way. Not from the murder, apparently, but rather from the false accusation. That summer, the police received dozens of reports about a suspicious man who looked somewhat like the photo robot. And honestly, something similar could be found in almost every fifth male resident of the city. The photo robot was, well, not very clear, and the sketch of the average man was ordinary and had no unique features that could be used to accurately identify him. Everyone who had a similar face type simply fell under the hot hand. Try to prove to them that it's not me, they won't ask. The active phase of the investigation lasted a month, and during this time, the police failed to establish the identity of the maniac. What's more, they managed to open a whole 20 cases of a similar nature. Well, that's how it goes. Crime in Kryvyi Rog is on the rise. If there are any viewers from this beautiful place, leave a comment. I visited there after a concert. It's similar to Lugansk, just a bit more distant. Despite the fact that the Kryvyi Rog maniac was very cautious and managed to avoid detection for a long time, eventually he made a fatal mistake. One day, his informant, who works in the adult service industry, called one of the operatives. The woman was asking whether the mysterious maniac everyone was talking about really existed, and speculated about how he kills and whether he has any distinctive features or habits. The operative respectfully listened to the woman and first of all sent her that very photo portrait, a photo robot. The woman immediately recognized the man depicted in it. Moreover, when the policeman told about the suffocated and strangled victims, the woman added that the person, who looks very much like the man from the photo robot, had recently used her services and had unusual preferences, ultra domination and strangulation. Having told all the details about the order with her future client, she agreed to meet for the provision of services. In her words, everything was going well, until the moment during the statutory act, this client did not start to strangle her. And not playing, not tickling like that, but really strangling. The woman said that the man was definitely ready to kill her. He wanted this. She has seen a lot, but these were not empty words. This information really intrigued the investigator, and he decided to check this man. the more he had his phone number. Having identified the location of the subscriber identity module card, the police found that the place of residence of this man often coincides with the one where the attacks and murders took place. And to issue an official accusation, all this was not enough. It was necessary to find concrete evidence that pointed to the involvement of this particular man in all the murders. So, the decision was made to catch him red-handed. In the area where the suspect was believed to be hunting for new victims, the police set up a woman with a similar physique and appearance to the type the maniac typically targeted for attacks. The women, of course, were briefed on everything and were under police surveillance. And this trick worked. The criminal did indeed attack one of the women who was participating in the operation. The attack, like the previous ones, came from behind, and the man began to strangle the woman. But the police officers immediately rushed in and saved her. Get acquainted. This seemingly unremarkable at first glance woman and mother of a little girl is the person who killed and tortured the horned beast. Andriy Belusenko's neighbors spoke positively about Belusenko, as did, in fact, his work colleagues. The man worked at the Artem mine and was always calm and cheerful. No one could have imagined that the beloved man and father would turn out to be a serious maniac murderer, capable of cold-blooded violence with elements of sadism. Most people, when they see a portrait of a serial killer, see a person who behaves aggressively, has a wild look, and at the very least, looks like a true crime content before bed. Only the most cold-blooded killers often do not differ from the average, calm, and at first glance, non-violent person. Remember this episode? That's when we find out.
I'm shocked like a maniac killer. They don't distinguish themselves from ordinary people.
So, otherwise, the attacks and harassment with a characteristic touch in Kryvyi Rog after the detention of Belusenko have intensified. At the time of the man's arrest, the police already had irrefutable evidence of his guilt. And Belusenko himself denied everything to the last. Although later he calmly and without coercion talked about how he committed the murders and even showed the places where the attacks took place. Psychological expertise showed that the man is absolutely sane and has no mental deviations. The court was also waiting for him. The KRIVYI prosecutor's office has filed a charge in the case of Belusenko for a series of crimes: premeditated murder, attempted murder, violent satisfaction of sexual passion in a natural way. The final verdict was delivered only 2 years after the arrest, in 2018. By this time, he had already been behind bars. The court found Belusenko guilty on all counts and sentenced him to life imprisonment, which apparently is good because now this man can't hurt anyone, at least not free. However, this does not bring back to life those innocent girls who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dear ones, if you've watched this video up to this second, know that you are the best. I really appreciate this. You know, I really do. Take care of yourself and be kind. Your health and safety are very important. In addition, I want to thank everyone who supports this channel, sponsoring on YouTube from 10 hryvnias per month or subscribing on Buy Me a Coffee. This channel exists thanks to you. Sonia was with you. See you next time. While you're here, check these out too. They're cool, right? That's it. The guys just explained.